The city pulsed with electricity that evening, the kind of shimmering energy that only surrounded the most anticipated nights in Hollywood. Outside the Grand Regent Theater, bright white spotlights crisscrossed the sky, searching the heavens as if looking for a star more luminous than those gathering below. A sea of reporters jostled behind velvet ropes, cameras flashing like frantic fireflies, and excited fans held posters and pens, hoping for a signature, a smile, even a glance from their heroes. The red carpet itself looked like molten velvet under the golden glow of floodlights, and every few seconds another celebrity arrived, stepping out of sleek black cars to a chorus of cheers. Inside the theater, executives and producers glanced repeatedly at the clock, whispering to each other as if trying to reassure themselves. Tonight's premiere was more than just another film release. It was being called the event of the season, and one name was on every tongue: Keanu Reeves. They spoke his name with reverence, with excitement, as if merely saying it could bring him into existence. The lead actor, the man everyone had come to see, was scheduled to arrive at precisely 8:15, but as the minutes crept toward 9, a ripple of unease began to move through the crowd. A reporter adjusted her headset, speaking rapidly into her microphone about the ongoing arrivals, then glanced toward the street again. Where was he? The organizers had even reserved a special space at the carpet's edge, roped off and waiting, a small podium adorned with bouquets of white lilies, chosen because Keanu once mentioned in an interview that lilies reminded him of home. Every moment of this evening had been orchestrated to honor him, yet the limo marked with his initials never came. Far from the noise and glitter, Keanu sat in the back seat of a modest black sedan. His posture relaxed, but his eyes heavy with a distant sadness. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, his tie slightly loosened as though it was an afterthought, his dark hair falling naturally around his face. The driver, an older man with a lined brow, occasionally glanced at him through the rearview mirror but said nothing. They both understood this was not a night for small talk. The freeway hummed beneath them, streetlights flickering past like silent witnesses to a choice no one else could understand. Keanu's phone rested face down on his lap, but his mind replayed the call from that morning. A call from a woman's trembling voice telling him that Michael, the man who once doubled his stunts in the early days when budgets were tight and reputations fragile, had passed away unexpectedly after a long illness. Michael had never been famous. He had never walked the red carpet or been cheered by strangers. Yet, years ago, when a dangerous motorcycle chase scene went wrong, it was Michael who threw himself into harm's way, taking the fall so Keanu could escape unscathed. That memory never left him. It had been tucked away, quiet and private, but it had lived in Keanu's heart all these years, like an ember still glowing long after the fire seemed to fade. As the sedan turned off the main road, the city's lights dimmed, replaced by the softer glow of residential streets. Keanu leaned his head against the window, watching as diners laughed through restaurant windows and children played under porch lights. Each face was a reminder of life's fragile threads, how quickly someone could vanish and how easily the world could move on without them. He thought about the red carpet he was meant to walk, the cameras waiting to capture every step, and he felt an almost physical weight pressing against his chest. What good was applause when a man who once saved your life was being lowered into the earth without anyone to stand in his honor? He exhaled slowly, eyes stinging, and for the first time that day, a faint smile touched his lips. Not a smile of joy, but of clarity. This choice, this night, was exactly where he needed to be. Back at the theater, whispers turned into restless murmurs. Assistants checked their watches, executives exchanged nervous looks, and one young fan clutched her poster tighter, eyes scanning every passing car. The host on the live feed tried to fill time with chatter, listing Keanu's accomplishments and hinting at surprise appearances. But beneath the glossy excitement, there was confusion, even a tinge of disappointment. No one there knew that miles away, down a quiet lane lined with oak trees, a car was slowing to a stop outside a modest chapel whose windows glowed softly against the dusk. Keanu's hand lingered on the door handle for a moment before he pushed it open, the evening air cool against his face. He straightened his jacket, inhaled deeply, and stepped out into the dim light. the sound of crickets replacing the imagined roar of a crowd. He walked slowly toward the chapel, his polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel path, and with every step he felt the distant glamour of Hollywood fade, replaced by something far more real, an unspoken promise to remember, to honor, and to show up when it mattered most. Inside, people would soon turn, startled, as the door creaked open, but for now he simply stood beneath the wooden awning, hands clasped before him, gazing at the name carved into the brass plaque by the entrance. Michael Jameson, Erman, friend, brother. Keanu closed his eyes, letting the weight of those words settle in his heart before he stepped forward and quietly disappeared into the warm light within. The chapel door closed gently behind Keanu, muffling the faint hum of evening insects outside, and as the service concluded later that night, he found himself once again seated in the back of the same modest sedan that had carried him away from the city. The night was deep now, the streets nearly empty, and the car's engine hummed softly as it rolled away from the chapel grounds. Through the window, he could still see the glow of the building shrinking in the distance, the light from its windows a fragile lantern in the darkness, and his chest tightened with an ache he could not quite name. He leaned back in his seat, loosening his tie completely this time, allowing the cool night air from the half-open window to brush against his face. The driver, sensing the weight in the car, remained silent, his eyes focused on the road that stretched like a ribbon through the shadows. Keanu's hands rested on his knees, fingers curled slightly, and in the stillness of that drive memories began to rise like ghosts from the quiet corners of his mind. He thought of Michael again, but not just as the stuntman who once took a dangerous leap to spare him. He remembered him as a friend who laughed easily, who stayed late after grueling shoots to share coffee and trade stories about the old days before fame wrapped itself like a cloak around Keanu's shoulders. He remembered the way Michael's hands were always scraped and bruised, yet he would wave off concern with a grin and a shrug, as if pain was just part of the job, part of the world they had chosen. The car rolled past darkened storefronts and quiet intersections, the occasional glow of a lone diner still open at midnight casting slices of light across the hood. Keanu watched these scenes pass by, feeling the distance between who he was in those neon-drenched Hollywood nights and who he had become in these quiet moments of grief. His mind drifted back to the premiere, to the images he knew were playing out without him. The roaring cheers, the blinding camera flashes, the stage where someone else would step up and smile in his place. He imagined the questions buzzing among reporters, the speculation that would fill the gossip sites by morning, and he felt no anger, no regret, only a calm certainty that he had chosen the only path that felt true to him. In a world where loyalty was often traded for headlines, he would not forget the people who built the foundation under his success, people like Michael, whose names were seldom spoken beyond the credits. The city lights grew sparser as they approached the freeway, and Keanu closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the road carry him deeper into thought. He remembered the last time he and Michael spoke years ago, on a set where they both stood looking out at a massive stunt sequence being prepared. Michael had patted him on the shoulder and said softly, "They will cheer for you, but remember, some of us are here catching you when you fall." Those words returned now, echoing with painful clarity, and Keanu's breath caught as he swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that burned at the corners of his eyes. The driver glanced back briefly, concern flickering in his weathered face, but Keanu gave a small nod as if to say he was fine, though they both knew fine was a fragile word tonight. Streetlights flickered over them in intervals, painting Keanu's profile in alternating bands of shadow and gold, and in those fleeting illuminations, his face seemed older, more worn, as though the weight of the years and the evening's choice were etched into every line. His phone vibrated quietly in his pocket, a notification from an assistant asking if he planned to issue a statement about his absence. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then set it back down without answering. Some things did not need to be explained to the world. Some things were meant to be lived quietly, witnessed only by those who mattered. The road curved gently, taking them back toward the heart of the city, but even as the skyline began to rise in the distance, Keanu felt no pull to return to the brightness. Instead, he sank deeper into reflection, thinking about how fleeting fame could be compared to the steady, quiet bonds built in moments no camera ever caught. He thought of Michael's family, the tears in the eyes of the man's young daughter as she clutched a folded program at the service, and the way her mother's hands trembled when Keanu took them in his own to offer a few words of comfort. Those images settled in his heart like stones in a river, shaping the current of his thoughts in ways that would not be easily undone. As the car merged onto the freeway, the hum of distant traffic rose around them, but the interior of the sedan remained a sanctuary of stillness. The only sounds the soft thrum of tires against asphalt and the occasional sigh from Keanu as he stared out at the blur of passing headlights. He wondered how many others in this city were driving through the night, carrying griefs unseen, making choices that would never be noticed by the world. It was in that quiet wondering that he found a strange kind of peace. When they finally approached his building, the driver slowed to a stop, and Keanu lingered in the back seat for a moment, watching the city breathe around him. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Thank you, Michael," before stepping out into the night, the hum of Hollywood still far away, replaced by the enduring echo of a promise kept. The chapel stood quietly at the end of a narrow lane, its wooden sign swaying gently in the night breeze, lanterns casting soft halos of light onto the gravel path that led to its doors. It was the kind of place most people would pass without a second glance, modest and weathered, the white paint chipped in places, ivy creeping up one side as if trying to cradle the building in nature's arms. Inside, the faint scent of old wood and burning candles lingered in the air, mingling with the soft rustle of clothing and the muted sobs of those who had gathered. Keanu stepped over the threshold without drawing attention to himself, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the worn wooden floorboards. Heads turned briefly as the door creaked shut, and then, as recognition dawned on a few faces, whispers rippled through the small crowd like a sudden breeze. A woman near the back gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Is that?" she murmured, but the words trailed off as Keanu lowered his gaze, offering a respectful nod before quietly making his way to an empty pew near the side. The chapel was not crowded. A few dozen people sat scattered among the rows, some holding hands, others sitting with arms wrapped around themselves as if trying to hold together what felt broken beyond repair. At the front, a simple wooden casket rested on a low platform, surrounded by modest flower arrangements. White lilies, pale roses, and a few sprigs of wildflower someone must have picked on the way there. A framed photograph sat atop the casket, showing Michael in his younger years, a wide grin splitting his face. His arms slung casually around a motorcycle helmet. Keanu's eyes lingered on that photograph, his chest tightening as memories surged unbidden. He could almost hear Michael's laugh, loud and infectious, and see the way he would wipe grease from his hands onto a rag before heading back onto set, ready for whatever stunt was next. The minister's voice broke through the quiet, soft and steady, reading verses of comfort, words meant to bring peace but landing like gentle stones in the hearts of those gathered. Keanu listened, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes lowered, but his mind was alive with moments that no sermon could capture. He remembered the first time he met Michael on a cramped set in Vancouver, both of them younger, hungry, and unproven. Michael had been the one to show him how to properly roll out of a fake punch, laughing when Keanu stumbled through it, offering encouragement without a trace of condescension. Over the years, their paths intertwined countless times. Michael was there for the early action films, the ones that barely paid, the ones that demanded too much from their bodies and too little from their souls. Michael never complained. He just showed up, did the work, and disappeared back into the shadows, content to let others take the spotlight. As the service continued, Keanu's eyes drifted to the family seated near the front. Michael's widow, her shoulders trembling under the weight of her loss, clutched a small handkerchief, her knuckles white. Beside her sat a boy no older than 10, his face pale and confused, as if the concept of death was still too large to fit into his understanding of the world. Keanu felt a deep pull in his chest, an ache that went beyond grief and into the realm of responsibility. He had known of Michael's family but had never truly met them, the pace of life and work always sweeping him away. Now, in this small chapel far from the bright lights, he felt the enormity of what it meant to be present, truly present, for someone who had once stood between him and harm without hesitation. When the minister invited those who wished to speak to step forward, there was a hesitant pause. A few murmurs passed through the crowd, but no one moved. Keanu's fingers tightened against each other. A quiet battle waged inside him. He was not a man who sought stages outside of his craft, not someone who filled silence with words easily, but this moment was not about ease. It was about honoring a man whose name might otherwise fade into quiet obscurity. Slowly he rose, the pew creaking softly as he stepped into the aisle. Every eye in the room followed him as he approached the casket, and for a heartbeat, the air seemed to still, the only sound the soft flicker of candle flames. He placed a single white lily, one he had brought with him, on top of the casket, his hand lingering on the polished wood. Then he turned to face the room, his eyes glistening under the dim lights. I was supposed to be somewhere else tonight," he began, his voice low but steady, carrying easily through the silence. "Somewhere with cameras, with lights, with people cheering, but I could not be there. I needed to be here." He glanced down at the photograph of Michael, a faint, bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. This man, he once did something for me that no one saw. He took a fall that could have been mine. He stood up, dusted himself off, and never asked for thanks. But I saw him. I remember. His gaze swept over the faces before him, some tearful, some stunned, all listening. "The world may never know his name the way it knows mine, but I want you to know, and I want his family to know. I would not be who I am or where I am without him." His voice caught slightly, and he paused, drawing a slow breath before finishing softly. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." There was no applause, no cameras flashing. Just the sound of quiet weeping and the collective exhale of a room that had been holding its breath. Keanu stepped down, returning to his seat. His head bowed as the service moved on, forever changed by the words that had been spoken in that humble chapel. The chapel had quieted again after Keanu spoke, but in his mind, memories unfolded with such vivid clarity that the murmured prayers and rustle of hymn sheets seemed to fade into the background. He sat there in that modest pew, eyes still on the casket, and his thoughts traveled backward through time like pages turning in a well-worn book. He remembered that first production set, a long-forgotten action film shot on a shoestring budget in the early 90s, where nights bled into mornings and safety often took a back seat to ambition. Michael had been there even then, a young man with quick reflexes and a wry sense of humor, the kind of man who made dangerous work feel lighter simply by being present. Keanu recalled one particular day, an overcast afternoon with a bitter wind, when a motorcycle sequence had been hurried through without proper rehearsal. The director had insisted they push forward despite the slick pavement, despite the stunt crew's concerns. Keanu was supposed to ride full throttle down a narrow alley, brake hard, and slide off before impact with a staged barrier, but the angle was wrong, the calculations off. Michael saw it first. Without a word, he moved into position, gesturing to Keanu to step aside and watch him run the maneuver once. Keanu had protested. "It's my scene, I should try." But Michael only shook his head with that calm, unshakable grin. "Not until we know it works," he had said. Then he gunned the engine, tires screaming against wet asphalt, the bike fishtailing dangerously as he leaned into the slide. The crash was louder than anyone expected. Sparks flew as metal scraped concrete, and Michael was thrown hard against the barricade, his helmet taking the brunt of the impact. The crew had rushed in, shouting his name, but Michael had waved them off, laughing breathlessly through gritted teeth. Better me than him. Keanu had stood there frozen, heart hammering in his chest, watching the man who had just saved him struggle to his feet, limping slightly, brushing debris from his jacket as if it were nothing more than dust. That moment had marked Keanu in ways words could not capture. It was a reminder that behind every actor's fame were people like Michael, men and women whose bodies bore the bruises and scars of a craft that demanded more than the audience would ever see. Yet outside that world, few remembered their names. They were footnotes in credits, anonymous protectors who absorbed the risks so others could shine. As the service continued, Keanu let his gaze drift across the small gathering, wondering how many of these people knew that side of Michael's life. He saw an older man with calloused hands, likely a fellow stunt performer, dabbing his eyes with a folded handkerchief. He saw a young woman with a weathered leather jacket, perhaps a daughter or niece, biting her lip to hold back tears. But there were also empty spaces, whole pews unfilled, and that quiet absence cut Keanu more deeply than he expected. In a fair world, he thought, this chapel would have been overflowing, cameras lined up outside, stories on every news outlet about the man whose courage had saved countless others. Instead, there was this small, tender circle of people, family, a few friends, a couple of old colleagues, doing their best to honor a man the world had already moved on from. Keanu felt a flicker of anger then, not at anyone in this room, but at the machine of celebrity itself, the way it devoured stories and discarded the unsung heroes behind them. He shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, and made a silent vow that Michael's name would not vanish, not as long as he had breath to speak it. The minister called for a hymn, and the room filled with soft, wavering voices. Keanu did not sing. Instead, he closed his eyes and let the melody wash over him, feeling each note settle into the ache inside his chest. He thought of all the premieres and interviews over the years when he had thanked directors, co-stars, producers, but rarely had he been asked about the men who made dangerous scenes possible. He remembered trying once, slipping Michael's name into an answer on live television, but the host had quickly redirected the conversation back to box office numbers. That memory stung now, a reminder of how easily the truth could be swept aside in the rush for something shinier. When the hymn ended, the minister spoke of Michael's kindness, his work ethic, his loyalty, and Keanu noticed a faint smile touch the widow's lips, as if hearing those words allowed her to breathe a little easier. The boy beside her clutched a small toy car in his hands, running his thumb along its chipped paint. Keanu's heart ached as he wondered what Michael had been like as a father. How many nights he had come home sore and exhausted, but still crouched down to play on the living room floor. He imagined Michael holding that boy's hand on walks, telling him stories about the film sets he had been on, leaving out the dangerous parts to keep the boy's world bright. That image rooted itself in Keanu's mind, and he knew then that his responsibility did not end with showing up tonight. He would stay in touch. He would make sure they knew they were not alone, that Michael's sacrifice and friendship were not forgotten in the whirl of fame. A soft breeze drifted through the chapel as someone opened a side window, and the candles flickered gently, shadows dancing across the walls. Keanu remained seated, unmoving, his face calm but his eyes glistening. Around him, people began to stand, moving slowly toward the casket to lay flowers or rest a hand on the polished wood in farewell. When his turn came, he moved with measured steps, pausing once more before the photograph of his friend. He whispered so softly no one else could hear, "You deserved more, my brother, but I will carry your name." Then he stepped back, folding himself into the crowd, just another mourner honoring a man the world might have overlooked, but whose impact on one life and countless others was far too great to ever be forgotten. A deep hush settled over the chapel after the last hymn faded, the kind of silence that carries both reverence and expectancy. Keanu remained seated for a long moment, feeling the rhythm of his own heartbeat in his ears, knowing the minister would soon invite final words. The soft creak of pews and shuffling of feet filled the room as several people hesitated, unsure if they had the courage to speak. The minister's gentle eyes moved across the congregation, pausing briefly on Keanu, almost as if sensing that there was something unspoken waiting to be released. Keanu lowered his gaze, his hands resting loosely in his lap, but inside he felt a pull stronger than any staged cue, stronger than any spotlight. He did not come here to perform. He came because something sacred demanded it. Slowly, deliberately, he rose, his movements drawing every eye in the room. The wooden floor groaned faintly under his weight as he stepped into the aisle, and for a heartbeat all that could be heard was the faint flicker of candlelight and the soft breathing of those gathered. He walked toward the front, the photograph of Michael growing larger with every step, until he stood only a few feet away from the casket. He let his eyes rest on that familiar smile frozen in time, and a wave of memories flooded through him. Michael laughing after a near miss on set. Michael handing him a bottle of water with a slap on the back. Michael saying, "We've got this," before every risky stunt. Keanu turned slowly, facing the small crowd. His face calm but his voice carrying a quiet power that commanded attention. "I have stood in front of thousands," he began softly, his words measured and heavy with sincerity. "But I have never been more honored to stand in front of anyone than I am right now." A few people wiped their eyes, and Michael's widow clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her lips trembling. "This man," Keanu continued, gesturing lightly toward the casket, "was more than a stuntman. He was more than the credits that rolled past too quickly at the end of a movie. He was a shield. He was a teacher. He was a friend. There were days when I was so focused on the cameras, on the lines, on the pressure, that I forgot what courage really looked like. Until I saw him step in without hesitation to take the risk so someone else could keep going." His voice softened, breaking slightly. "People think being an actor means you stand alone in the spotlight, but the truth is, you never stand alone. You stand because of people like Michael, people who catch you when you fall, people who get up when they are hurt, smile through the pain and say, 'Let's do it again.'" Keanu's gaze drifted to the boy holding the toy car, and for a long second he locked eyes with him, speaking now not just to the room, but to a child who might grow up hearing stories about his father. "Your dad," he said gently, "was a hero in every sense of the word, not the kind that wears a cape or stands on a stage. The kind that shows up every day and gives his best without asking for anything in return. If you ever wonder what kind of man he was, remember this. I would not be here, I would not be who I am if it were not for him." The boy's lip quivered, and he clutched the toy tighter, nodding slowly as if trying to hold on to each word. A tear slipped down Keanu's cheek then, unnoticed at first in the dim light, but when he drew a breath and continued, the crack in his voice was impossible to hide. "I was supposed to be somewhere else tonight," he said. "A red carpet premiere. A celebration of a film that might not even exist if Michael hadn't been there for me so many years ago. But none of that mattered more than being here, because fame is fleeting, applause fades, but loyalty is forever." The words seemed to echo against the chapel walls, sinking into the hearts of everyone listening. Even those who had not known Michael personally felt the gravity of what was being shared, the unshakable truth in the way Keanu spoke. He paused then, lowering his eyes once more to the casket. "Michael, I never said thank you properly. I should have found you sooner. But I am here now, and I hope somehow you can hear me. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your laughter. Thank you for every single day you gave this industry without expecting the world to notice. I noticed." His hand reached out, fingers brushing the cool wood of the casket as if offering a final touch of gratitude. The chapel was silent except for a few muffled sobs, the kind that come from deep places of love and loss. Keanu stepped back, giving a small nod to the family, then returned to his seat slowly, each footstep measured. His shoulders heavy but his heart a little lighter. Around him, the room seemed to breathe again, the minister's voice returning softly to close the service. But the eulogy lingered in the air like a quiet anthem to an unsung hero. And in that moment, it did not matter that somewhere across the city cameras was still flashing, waiting for a star who never arrived. Here, in this humble chapel, under the soft glow of candlelight, Keanu had given the truest performance of his life. Not one of acting, but of remembrance, gratitude, and love. When the final prayer ended and the minister's voice faded, the chapel's atmosphere shifted into a quiet murmur of footsteps and hushed conversations. The congregation rose slowly, each movement weighted with the gravity of farewell. The casket remained at the front, bathed in the dim glow of flickering candles, but the focus now drifted toward one another. Handshakes, embraces, soft words of comfort passed between people who had shared both grief and memory. Keanu remained seated for a moment longer, feeling the stillness seep into his bones before finally standing. He ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling deeply, and joined the slow procession toward the exit. Yet instead of slipping away unnoticed, he lingered near the family, his presence gentle but solid, like a pillar in the room. Michael's widow looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, surprise still etched across her face. She clutched his hand with both of hers, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Thank you for coming. I cannot believe you came." Keanu shook his head softly, squeezing her hands with a quiet intensity. "He deserved more than just my coming," he replied, his voice low and sincere. "He deserved the world's thanks. I am just sorry it took me so long to say it." People began filing out through the chapel doors, their shadows stretching long across the gravel as the lantern light outside swayed in the evening breeze. Keanu stayed behind, helping where he could, gathering him sheets left behind, stacking folding chairs, and carrying them toward the side room. Several of Michael's old stunt colleagues, men with weathered faces and shoulders marked by years of falls and collisions, joined him. They exchanged knowing glances, no words necessary. In their eyes, Keanu saw recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that he was not there as a star but as one of them, bound by shared respect for a fallen brother. Together they worked, the scrape of chairs and soft thud of wood on wood mingling with the distant hum of night insects outside. A little while later, as the crowd thinned to only family and a few close friends, a small boy approached Keanu hesitantly. It was Michael's son, still clutching the toy car in his small hands. His eyes were wide, uncertain, but filled with a curiosity that pushed him forward. "Are you really John Wick?" the boy asked in a quiet, trembling voice, as though the question itself might be too much to ask. Keanu crouched down to meet him at eye level, his suit jacket brushing against the floor, and for the first time that night a gentle smile softened his solemn features. "I am," he said softly, "but only because of people like your dad. He made sure I could do what I do. He made me braver than I thought I could be." The boy blinked, absorbing the words with a seriousness beyond his years. Keanu reached out, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the fragility of a young life now shadowed by loss. "Your dad was a real hero," Keanu continued, his voice steady but tender. "Not just in movies. In real life. Do not ever forget that." The boy nodded slowly, looking down at the toy car before pressing it gently into Keanu's hand. "He gave me this. You can keep it for tonight if you want." Keanu stared at the little car resting in his palm, its chipped paint gleaming faintly in the candlelight, and his throat tightened. He closed his fingers carefully around it and nodded. "I will keep it safe," he promised. "Thank you." The boy gave a shy smile and returned to his mother's side, leaving Keanu crouched there, holding the toy as though it were made of glass. Outside the chapel, the air had cooled, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine trees. Keanu stepped into the night, the soft crunch of gravel under his shoes as he made his way toward the modest parking area. A few people remained, speaking in low tones, while others stood quietly under the lanterns, lost in their own reflections. Keanu approached one of Michael's old colleagues, a grizzled man with streaks of gray in his beard, and clasped his hand firmly. "He was one of the best," the man said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "You coming here, it means a lot to us." Keanu nodded, his grip strong and warm. "He was more than the best," he replied quietly. "He was family. Whether we said it or not, he was family." As the last of the chairs were stacked and the doors of the chapel closed for the night, Keanu stood for a long moment at the edge of the gravel path, staring back at the building. The lantern swayed gently, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the whitewashed walls. He thought of the world he would return to in the morning, the interviews, the headlines, the questions. None of it felt heavy now. What weighed on him was something far deeper. An obligation to live in a way that honored men like Michael, men who stood quietly in the background but carried so much of the burden that others could stand tall. Keanu slipped the toy car into his inner jacket pocket, feeling its small weight against his chest as a reminder, a talisman of gratitude and responsibility. He walked slowly toward the car, waiting to take him home, pausing once more under the night sky to look up at the scattering of stars. They shimmered faintly, indifferent yet eternal, and Keanu allowed himself a single whispered vow. "I will not forget you." Then he opened the car door, slid into the back seat, and as the driver started the engine, the chapel faded into the distance behind him, leaving only the quiet night and the echo of a promise kept. By the time Keanu's car merged back into the city, the bright lights of Hollywood once again filled the horizon, but the world he carried inside him felt entirely different from the one he had left hours earlier. His phone, which had remained silent during the drive, began to vibrate steadily in his pocket as signal bars returned and notifications flooded in like an oncoming tide. He didn't reach for it at first, preferring instead to watch the blur of neon signs and empty sidewalks glide past the window. The night outside felt louder now, filled with the distant bass of music from late-night clubs and the impatient honking of cars caught in traffic. But inside the car there was stillness, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the tires. Keanu's hand instinctively brushed against the toy car tucked into his jacket pocket, grounding him with the memory of Michael's son and his solemn, trusting eyes. That simple gift seemed to burn brighter in his heart than any award or standing ovation ever had. Finally, he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through the flood of messages. His publicist had sent a string of increasingly urgent texts. "Where are you? Reporters are asking. The producers are worried. Call me immediately." There were notifications from entertainment news outlets speculating on his absence, tweets from fans wondering if he was ill, and a thread of gossip that grew more dramatic with every refresh. But buried within those, a different kind of notification caught his eye. A photograph posted by a local attendee of the funeral, blurry but unmistakable, showing Keanu standing quietly beside a wooden casket, a white lily in his hand. The caption was simple. He skipped the premiere to say goodbye to someone who mattered. Within minutes, that single post had been shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands. As Keanu scrolled, the photo spread across his feed like wildfire. Headlines began to shift from speculation to awe. Keanu Reeves chooses loyalty over fame. Hollywood star seen at small-town funeral instead of his own premiere. The internet falls in love with Keanu all over again. Comment after comment appeared, people around the world expressing admiration, gratitude, even tears, for a man who would leave the glitz behind to honor someone no one expected him to remember. In between the praise were stories from stunt performers and crew members who had worked with Michael over the years. One wrote, "I worked with Michael on 3 films. He never bragged, never complained." Keanu showing up tonight says everything we all felt but never said. Another posted a photo of Michael rigging up a stunt harness years ago, captioned, "This man kept so many safe. Thank you for remembering him, Keanu." In the car, Keanu stared at the screen, overwhelmed by the cascade of tributes, his chest tightening with a mix of sorrow and pride. He thought of Michael's widow, of the boy with the toy car, and how tomorrow they might open their phones to see the world speaking their loved one's name with reverence. A warmth spread through him, not of ego, but of quiet relief that Michael's story might not vanish after all. He set the phone down and turned his face toward the window, watching as a giant billboard advertising his film loomed overhead. His own image stared back at him, larger than life, a character frozen in action. But tonight, he felt smaller in the best possible way, part of something larger than the roles he played. A testament to love, to loyalty, to remembrance. The car slowed as it entered a quieter district, and the driver spoke softly for the first time, breaking hours of silence. "Mr. Reeves," he said, glancing at him through the rearview mirror, "I saw the news. That was a good thing you did." Keanu met the man's eyes in the mirror, his expression thoughtful. "It was the right thing," he replied simply, his voice low and steady. "Some things matter more than lights and cameras." The driver nodded, as if understanding something unspoken, and returned his attention to the road. Later that night, in the solitude of his apartment, Keanu removed the toy car from his pocket and set it gently on a wooden shelf beside a framed photo of his own family. He stood there for a long time, staring at it, hearing echoes of Michael's laughter, seeing flashes of the funeral, feeling the clasp of the boy's small hand. He opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers moving slowly as he crafted a simple message for his fans, one that needed no polish or pretense. Tonight I said goodbye to a man who gave everything and asked for nothing. Michael Jameson was a friend, a protector, and a true hero behind the camera. Remember the people who hold you up, even when no one is watching." He hesitated, then attached a photo of the lily resting on the casket, its white petals bright against the dark wood. Within minutes of posting, the comments poured in again. Fans sharing their own stories of unsung heroes, stunt performers posting tributes to Michael, strangers promising to thank the people in their own lives who worked quietly in the background. Keanu closed his laptop, the glow of the screen fading, and leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the day settle into a deep, steady calm. Outside, the city still sparkled with its endless hunger for spectacle, but in that moment, in that quiet room, something far more meaningful had taken root. Michael's name would not be forgotten. His story would travel further than anyone in that small chapel might have imagined. And as Keanu turned off the last light and let the darkness wrap gently around him, he felt a rare, precious peace, knowing that even in a world obsessed with appearances, a single act of loyalty could still shine brighter than all the cameras in Hollywood. The morning sun rose softly over Los Angeles, turning the glass towers gold and painting the quiet streets with a gentle light that seemed almost reluctant to disturb the night's stillness. In a world already spinning with headlines and streaming feeds, Keanu woke early, slipping from his bed with the quiet precision of someone who had lived through too many loud days. His apartment was bathed in a muted glow, the kind that softened edges and made even the busiest mind feel momentarily calm. He moved through his living room slowly, his bare feet soundless against the hardwood floor, and paused in front of the shelf where the small toy car sat. It looked almost ordinary in the daylight, just chipped red paint and tiny wheels, but Keanu felt the weight of its meaning as though it carried an entire lifetime within its frame. He reached out, tracing the edge with his thumb, and in that simple act, the memories of the night before rose again like a tide. The flicker of candles in the chapel, the tremble in the boy's voice, the gratitude in the widow's eyes, the collective breath of strangers who had shared something sacred in a world too often distracted by spectacle. The world beyond his window had already moved on to new obsessions. Yet online the photo of him at the funeral continued to spread. News anchors spoke with uncharacteristic warmth, discussing loyalty and humility in an industry where both were rare. Fans posted messages not just about Keanu but about their own unsung heroes, a grandmother who raised them in silence, a friend who defended them without credit, a teacher who stayed after hours without ever seeking thanks. Michael's name appeared again and again in comment threads, not as a stuntman in the credits, but as a man whose life now rippled outward in ways even he could never have foreseen. Keanu read a few of those posts, his lips pressing into a faint line of thought, then closed the laptop gently, unwilling to let the noise drown out the memory of the quiet chapel and the way the air had felt inside it. He decided not to go out that morning, ignoring a fresh string of invitations and interview requests. Instead, he brewed himself a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise, and carried it to his small balcony. The city stretched before him, alive and restless, but from here it seemed almost serene. He thought of Michael's family, how they might be waking up now, how they might feel knowing the world had, for a fleeting moment, turned its gaze toward their loss and offered something like reverence. He imagined the boy holding his mother's hand as they scrolled through the stories, his face lighting up as he saw his father's name spoken with respect. Keanu closed his eyes and let the thought settle into his chest, where grief and gratitude lived side by side like old companions. In the stillness, memories continued to weave through his mind, not just of Michael but of countless others who had shaped his journey. A makeup artist who had once covered his bruised face after a difficult stunt, a driver who had waited patiently through long hours of reshoots, a nameless extra who once slipped him a note of encouragement when he was struggling with a role. Their faces blurred, but their impact remained, forming a tapestry of quiet, invisible support that had carried him farther than he had ever realized. He thought of the red carpet, the flash of cameras, the way the world measured success in appearances and applause. Last night had reminded him that real success was quieter, deeper, and far more enduring than any photograph could capture. He rose from his chair, finishing the last sip of coffee, and walked back inside. The toy car caught the light again, glinting faintly as though alive with its own secret glow. Keanu picked it up and slipped it back into his pocket, deciding then that he would carry it with him for a while. A silent reminder to live every day with the kind of loyalty Michael had shown. He thought of the little boy's hopeful eyes and promised himself that he would not be just a visitor in their lives. He would call, he would check in. He would make sure they knew that their loss mattered, that Michael's story did not end at the closing of a casket. Later, as the days stretched on, Keanu stepped out onto the busy street, not toward a film set or a press event, but toward a small florist tucked into the corner of a quiet neighborhood. He bought another white lily, the petals soft and cool beneath his fingers, and carried it with him as he walked back through the city. To anyone else he looked like any other man walking alone, lost in thought, but inside him was a heartbeat steady with purpose. He would visit Michael's grave again soon, not for cameras, not for headlines, but because that is what loyalty meant, showing up again and again, even when no one is watching. As evening settled once more, Keanu placed the lily in a small vase beside the toy car and sat by the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. He thought about how easily the world forgot, how quickly names faded, but how powerful it could be when one person decided to remember. In that quiet apartment, far from the noise and glamour, he felt a calm that went deeper than words. Some acts did not need applause. Some promises did not need witnesses. And as he gazed out at the night, Keanu whispered softly to himself, a vow only he could hear. "You are not forgotten, my friend. Not now. Not ever."